So last August, Canada's Competition Bureau was ordered to pay Rogers $13 million. Why would that ever possibly be the case? Well, our merger court decided that the Bureau's attempts to block the Rogers-Shaw merger were considered unreasonable. Now, Rogers' pitch at that time was the merger was going to help keep costs down for Canadians. What happened at the start of this year? Prices went up, and not just with Rogers. So, as this merger was being evaluated, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, basically threatened legislative action if he didn't start seeing prices go down. So, with prices going up, why does this keep happening? And what comes next? I have absolutely no idea, but I'm very, very fortunate to have MobileSyrup's telecom reporter, Nida Zafar, to basically join and explain all the stories that she's been writing about this for like the last, 6-12 months.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so let's dig in. First of all, thank you for coming.
Of course.
Really appreciate your work. As an OG MobileSyruper myself, it makes me feel good to have someone other than Patrick on the podcast to talk about this stuff, because we don't have to talk about Apple or VR or anything like that. I would say that every Canadian is familiar with like what's going on with our telecoms, but it's not often a conversation that we have on this podcast. So I want to start like at the most basic level. We'll ease people into the MobileSyrupness, and then we'll get really nitty gritty between the tensions of competition, innovation, and corporate oligopolies, basically. How often in your reporting, in MobileSyrup's reporting, do you see phone prices and plans go up in Canada?
I see them very often. I would say maybe around at least 2 to 3 times. And not just phone plans alone. It could also just be roaming plans, but they are tied to phone plans. So it is quite common to see, one plan or another. And if it's not like wireless, then maybe it's your internet plan or your TV plan, because people still do have TV plans and home phone plans.
Or bundled in.
Bundles,
services,
right.
Okay.
So they do go up about, I would say, twice a year at least.
Okay. Yeah. And in your experience, because I know you guys report, I know there's a deep MobileSyrup readership lust for like pricing plan changes across the board. How often does it take the other carriers to match a price increase? Like generally, like does Rogers raise a price and then a couple months later TELUS is like, oh, that's a good idea, we should do that too? Like what's the window of time between one carrier increasing their price for a product and then the other carriers increasing or matching that price for the same product?
So there isn't a long waiting period, but that waiting period is not the same every time. So, looking at the big 3 providers, Rogers, Bell, and TELUS, the national providers, they're usually quick to act on this. And they're seen across their flanker brands as well. So like Koodo, Fido, and Virgin Plus. So like I said, there's no fixed day or timeline. Sometimes they do it one after the other. Sometimes they wait a month to do it. So I'll give you an example. So in April 2023, MobileSyrup reported a $2 price hike on some plans from Fido and Koodo. And pretty much within the same week, Virgin Plus also increased their price by $2. But then another example, which is a longer time period, last January, Bell said it's going to increase its roaming plans by $1 a month. A couple weeks later, so like about a month later, TELUS made a similar announcement.
Okay, so it's never longer than a month,
No.
but it could be as fast as a week.
It could be as fast as a day.
So now, this might be editorializing a little bit, but do you feel like there's, given how consistently this happens, is it like one day Joe TELUS wakes up and he's like, oh my God, Rogers has raised their prices. What will we do? We need to do that. Or do you get a sense from this, given the consistency, that there's, if not coordination, at least some form of collaborative understanding that if a price is going to go up, everyone else is going to match it? Do you ever see a circumstance where a competitor is looking to lower a price or maintain a lower price if it goes up beyond a period of a month? Like, do you ever see someone looking to really say, hey, Rogers has raised the price of this $3, $5 for this roaming plan or things like that? Do you ever see the competitive carriers, whether it's TELUS or Bell, hold their pricing for an extended period of time or drop it? Or is it always a staged and kind of coordinated eventual price increase?
It's pretty much always an eventual price increase. The only time I can actually recall right now, there obviously might be more times, is actually when Rogers said that it wouldn't increase their prices. So as I mentioned like earlier about the roaming prices when Bell and
Hmm.
Telus
Hmm.
did, Rogers said it wouldn't increase them, and then they didn't increase them.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's like the only instance that I can kind of comes to my mind about that.
And I believe that was like a promise or part of the consideration in relation to the merger talks, right? Or it was
I
coming around the same time at the very
Yeah,
least.
it was coming around the same time as it.
Okay. So I guess maybe the final like throat clearing, like setting context. And again, we have a strong Canadian listenership and viewership. They're probably like, Douglas, we know our phone plans suck, but I want to just like set the stage so that we can dig into reasons for this, what's going on, the big kerfuffle that seems to be have kicked up amongst some MPs
Mhm.
to start off the year, which is very interesting to me. But just to like baseline this, because you're talking about like $5 here, $3 here, roaming plans, flanker brands. How expensive are Canadian plans relative to the rest of the world? Like, what are we dealing with here?
So, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about people say Canadians pay some of the highest prices in the world, and it is actually true. So, there have been multiple studies that outline this. For example, a May 2023 study from HelloSafe, which is an online platform that compares financial policies, said that in 2022, Canada was the 19th most expensive country in the world for mobile prices. So, 1 gigabyte of data was like $7.75,
Hmm.
which is a lot. Every year, the federal government publishes a price comparison
Hmm.
study from Well Communications as well. And that study doesn't look at all over the world, but it looks at countries in the G7 and Australia.
Gotcha.
And in that too, Canada was like in the top three. I believe only Japan and the United States was actually ahead of that. So
Okay.
yes, Canadians do pay, some of the higher prices for phone plans in the world. I don't know how many countries there are. I think there's like around 200. So if Canada's 19th, for example,
Yeah, we're up there.
it's up there,
And then
right?
amongst G7 countries,
Yeah.
our most obvious point of comparison.
Mhm.
Okay, so um, basically, we're in a situation here where the prices are continuously going up. They're already pretty expensive, and as we've seen with like our three major carriers and whatever their flanker bands, they seem to be in. Looking directly to the camera, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but just observing that it seems like these price increases are happening basically in lockstep. Um, I guess what are we to do here, or maybe let's get into this. Could you describe to me, because I think you are actually the first person to write about this to kick off the new year. It was like January 2nd or something like that. I was still in bed, sick with my like holiday cold, and you're filing stories about Roger price increases. Talk to me about why this most recent price increase has kicked off such a kerfuffle amongst Canadian MPs, and maybe we'll get into it that way because everything that you're describing to me, I would say, has been the experience that I had at MobileSyrup, and
Mhm.
that prior to my time there, we're talking like 10 to 15 years of historicals of like this is just how it goes down. So new year, new you. Rogers says, "Hey, we're raising prices." Why this time did we see the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry making comments, other MPs freaking out? Give us the context around that.
So I think a lot of that freak out goes back to the Rogers Shaw merger. So, Rogers took over Shaw in a $26 billion transaction in March
Hmm.
2023.
Hmm.
And, part of that, it took a long time I think it took like a little bit over 2 years or like around the 2 year mark for Rogers to gain that approval.
Yeah.
And one of the key issues that came up during that 2 year period was affordability.
Yeah.
And, the CEO said, this merger is going to be good for affordability. It's gonna, I can't necessarily say that he promised prices will go down, but he did say,
What was beyond the promise? What was the was underpinning the argument that prices were going to go down? Like, why were we to expect as Canadians
Mhm.
that prices would go down if competition was being eliminated? Like, what was Rogers basically saying
Yeah.
this merger would lead
Okay.
to?
So Rogers wasn't saying that competition would be eliminated. They said that if Freedom
Well,
Videotron,
I'm saying competition would be eliminated. They were
yes,
saying this was going to lead to lower prices. So how
yes.
did that connect?
Okay, so when Videotron took over Freedom Mobile, there was they promised that Freedom Mobile is going to become, the fourth national competitor.
Mhm.
We have yet to see that happen.
Yeah.
It's still the big three, and the idea was that, okay, if there's a fourth national player instead of just three, there's going to be more options. There's going to be more competition, right? And that's gonna bring prices down. But we haven't seen that at all,
Yeah.
right? So the
And we
problem,
had, just refer back to, maybe I'll link in the show notes. We actually had Tony Lacavera on the podcast back at that time when he was making the argument, basically begging for this merger to not go through to provide the opportunity to create that fourth major
yes,
competitor,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So there was that was the argument, and Rogers CEO he but went in front of the industry committee, the federal industry committee, and he did say that it's going to lead to more affordability. It's going to be better, and it's not just the CEO, but when it did receive eventual approval, Minister Champagne said, I'm going to be watching these guys like a hawk, and if
Yeah, let's go to, like, I got one of the quotes here,
mhm,
because I think it's important to, like, level set. I think this was like March 31st, so somewhere in
yes,
this process.
yeah,
If Canadians do not begin to see a clear and meaningful reduction in prices within a reasonable amount of time as a result of this decision, I will have no choice but to use further legislative and regulatory powers to drive down prices.
mhm,
I don't know what a reasonable amount of time was. Obviously, this merger was delayed, but I don't think the expectation was immediately after those Black Friday, Cyber Monday deals come to an end that prices
mhm.
are increasing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So Minister Champagne actually made that on March 31st, as you mentioned, which was the same day that he approved the merger.
Mhm.
So I think one of the reasons why there's been so much, political uproar, I guess you could say, is because, like, okay, so we had the CEO come to the industry committee and promise this or
Yeah.
say affordability. And then we had the minister on this side who said that if prices don't go down, if they go up, I'm going to act. So I guess people are kind of, or even politicians are questioning, like, where's the action?
Yeah.
You made these promises, these commitments. Why aren't you following through on them?
Well, yeah. And again, this is all coming in a context where, if not the legislative component of our government, one of our regulatory bodies, the Competition Bureau, sits under ISED, which is Minister Champagne's ministry, fought this merger, lost, and then was forced to pay $13 million
Yeah.
for the, I guess, the privilege of losing the case. And then again, we've had Commissioner Boswell. I should have been wearing my hashtag Free Boswell t-shirt. That was a real miss on my part. I'm going to blame Laundry Day being on Sundays, not on Fridays. We've had him on the podcast previously, I think shortly after he effectively lost the Rogers case, talking about some of the changes that need to happen because these competition cases aren't necessarily argued as to whether or not competition is decreasing, but whether or not it's decreasing in a significant way, right? Like it's not necessarily enough to prove that this is going to be less competition. They have to prove that the reduction of competition is significant and harmful, right? Would I maybe going back up top to what Rogers has been doing and kicking this off? Is it normal to see like first business day of the new year price increase from the telecoms, or was this a little bit of a sneaky Pete scenario where Rogers was like, we're just gonna slide this in under the door?
I can't say that they said, okay, January 1st woke up and like, okay, we're going to jack prices. I believe
No,
they
I'll
were.
say that, but have you seen historically price increases right at the start of the new year?
Yes. So I actually believe, but Rogers did inform their customers at the end of December.
Oh, okay.
And then it was really just MobileSyrup was not the first, was one of the first to pick up on this.
Well, I only read MobileSyrup.
Okay, well,
so,
there you
yeah.
go. And yeah, that's really when people notice as at the end of the year their bills. So, but yes, I have seen price increases usually at the beginning of the year. It's normal, and I feel like there's one like 6 months down the road as well.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
so I would maybe, again, you are a telecom reporter. You're
Mhm.
very serious in your work. I'm a podcaster. You say it's normal. I say it's being normalized. I'll carry that weight. But okay, so but again, this
Sorry, it may be normal, but it's not right. So
okay,
you can
okay.
normalize something, but it doesn't have to be right.
I love it. I was going to give you air cover in case you didn't want to go there, but I appreciate you repping the syrup from that perspective. And I would assume all of your readers, and frankly, most Canadians, right? We don't like paying more, and we also don't like paying more than everyone else for, just like, oh,
Mhm.
it's 6 months into the year. Here's your standard price increase.
Right.
Um, let's talk a little bit about the minister reaction, right? So I think a letter was sent. The several members of the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology were basically calling on peers to reconvene and discuss the increasing cost of cell phone packages. I think a letter was sent to MP Joel Lightbound, the chair of the committee. Pointing out that Rogers is basically increasing the cost of wireless services, $7 and $9 basically starting, this week, January 17th, and that those charges were going to apply to the flanker brands. And then I think MobileSyrup had some additional reporting noting that Bell customers
Mhm.
got notified within a similar window. And I think you have been trying to chase down TELUS for some
Yeah.
comments on
Mhm.
that for a while, right?
Yeah. So I think the fact that TELUS has not been responding to the many, many emails that myself as well as my team members have sent, I think that should paint a picture of what should happen. Because if you're not going to raise prices, I feel like they would come out and say that. That would be good press. That would be reported on.
Mhm.
The fact that they haven't acknowledged it at all, I feel like TELUS customers should also keep an eye on their bill.
Yeah, a huge opportunity for them if they wanted to and
Hmm.
say, hey, both of our competitors are raising prices. That's not it. Tell us we got lots of iguanas and cute little animals in our commercials. Come on over here, join Big
Yep.
Green. But no, they're remaining silent,
Hmm.
which I think you correctly noting um, shows an indication that they might follow that way. But then also, I would say, like, again, yes, Rogers informed their customers
Yeah.
at the end of the year. Was it like December 26th or
Yes.
something like that?
That just to go back on that, it's I can't speak for the company, and I'm just saying that it was the timing was very interesting.
Mhm.
The holiday season, people are busy.
Yep.
Even if you don't celebrate, I don't celebrate Christmas, but I still don't look at my bill. There's a billion things to do
Yeah,
before
there's
the
still
end of the year.
Netflix to watch, even if you're
Exactly.
not
There's
celebrating Christmas, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a billion things to do before the end of the year, and you can't say that people are necessarily looking, paying attention to their finances.
Okay.
And I do want to touch on one thing on Bell. Bell also did not actually confirm that they're increasing prices. Our multiple requests again there have not returned in
Oh, they
any
didn't confirm
answers.
with you. They just told their
Yeah,
customers.
they told their customers, so
Mm,
that's how we know. So again, I think the fact that both Bell and Telus are not confirming it, that doesn't mean that they're not going to increase
gotcha.
prices.
Okay.
So just yeah.
So again, basically, this committee kicked off its last meeting December 14th, adjourning for the holidays.
Hmm.
Shortly after that, or right around that time, Rogers notifies customers. Bell follows suit. Then, beginning of the new year, they're dropping hot letters to ministers, basically saying, "What are we going to do about this?"
Hmm.
Right? Can you talk me through the amazing work our representatives of government have done to solve this problem? Like, it's January 19th. I'm assuming they've already solved this. They've
Oh,
been up in
amazing.
arms. They've been
Hmm.
calling for committee meetings and investigations. There's been a lot of tweets or zeets, I guess, sent on X
Hmm.
recently. They've solved this, right? Catch our listeners up to date
Oh,
on
yeah.
all the amazing developments that have
Yeah,
happened
the
since then.
sarcasm is noted.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm really glad. I was worried there for a second. If you're
oh
like,
no, I was like,
yeah.
yeah, just because MPs are sending letters and making tweets and meeting before their Christmas break is over, that doesn't mean that action is happening.
Mm,
So that one meeting that did happen before their Christmas break ended, I did watch that, and there was 2 hours of back and forth. It did not lead to any resolution at all. Um, I guess, MP Perkins, who was
mhm.
one of the MPs who brought forward the letter, wanted to look into a study to examine these price hikes and why they're happening. And then there was a lot of discussion on um, making sure that it can be thorough and include all the elements it should, which I do believe is important. But for 2 hours, it was just back and forth. I heard a lot about, I don't know why, but the MPs were going into AI, and we have to like
Mm,
focus on that as well.
yeah. So
Yeah.
there's some bills C-27,
Yes.
ADA provisions, which again, our listeners, viewers, we've got episodes on episodes about that stuff. That basically they were saying, engaging in such a fulsome
Hmm.
study would be a distraction at this time where we really need to lock down AI regulation, because that bill has been bandied about for basically the last 2
Yeah.
years, which is understandable. Maybe also worth noting that MP Sebastian Lemire
Hmm.
had put forward a motion in September to start a study on this, exploring accessibility, affordability of wireless products, technological advancements such as 5G, and the expansion of
Hmm.
mobile. So there was already something on the docket
Yeah.
of like, maybe we should start this.
Yes.
And then, I guess per your reporting, the committee had agreed to conduct that study when they had more time to allocate to it.
Hmm.
And then I'll read this quote from MP Tony Van Bynen, who said, my biggest fear is that we're looking at doing one and a half things at the same time. It's important that we give full consideration to the issue at hand. And if we're genuinely concerned about it, let's make sure that it's a thorough analysis and we get all the facts. Okay. So it's at least sounds like they are um, giving speech towards the idea of getting
Hmm.
this process right. But basically, that meeting ended up with no go forward
No.
resolution
Mm-mm.
or next
Nothing at
steps.
all.
Okay.
Nothing at all. But my thing with that is, I understand that committees do have a lot of work, and
Hmm.
that the bill is important, but you're really at this point weighing one thing over the other, right?
Yeah.
How do you choose which one's more important than the other? And if you need,
Is it possible to do things in parallel in this government? See our last couple of episodes on our trust battery when it comes to implementing any sort of innovation policy. But hey, this doesn't matter. These are just random MPs as part of a committee, right? We've got ISED rolling in. We've got Minister Champagne. He laid down some very clear guidelines when he approved this on
Mhm.
March 31st of last year. I'm assuming him and his office immediately jumped in and said, "This will not stand. We're going to take action." Right? What was the comment that an ISED Canada representative had sent back to questions about what would be done about this?
Yeah, so that was actually based on a CBC report. So yeah, so one of their comments really was, that if if Canadians don't like these price hikes, they should perhaps look at other plans. Which, to be frank, is kind of a ridiculous comment to make.
Yeah, it's the Steve Jobs "don't hold your phone that way."
Yes, pretty
But
much.
as we have spent maybe the past like 15, 20 minutes establishing, all of these plans are going up in coordination because there
Exactly.
are only three carriers,
Mhm.
because we just prevented the option for a fourth major carrier.
Yeah.
So that didn't sit very well. How quickly did Minister Champagne reverse track on that? I think later in the week.
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think he waited that long, but I just want to touch on just the idea of, I'm a telecom reporter, so my job is to look at these plans,
Mhm.
and I take you know like me and as well as John, we take like at least like 30 minutes to an hour every day looking over all these
Yeah.
plans.
Because
I
again, they're not well
Yeah,
necessarily advertised. Things might be
exactly.
going up. They're
So
often, I've many times in the past that MobileSyrup has been the first people to identify or report or communicate that prices are going
mhm.
up, because it's not like the carriers are necessarily
Exactly.
broadcasting
Oh,
this.
they never do. And we do it because it's our job. People don't have time to look at all of these
Yeah.
plans, find the best option. And to be frank, these plans are really hard to understand as well. Like their
Yeah.
data caps and what that means, and paying extra for data, but some plans are unlimited.
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I should correct myself. I got this wrong. That comment that we got from that we just reported from the ISED Canada representative actually came hours after Minister Champagne said Canadians still pay too much and see too little competition for cellular services, which is like, my guy, you approved less competition,
Mhm.
and then our own competition body and process agreed that it wasn't enough of a lack of competition to do something. Now, as we've noted, Minister Boswell has been re-upped. There have been some changes to the Competition Act as part of legislature to give more power to the Competition Bureau to crack down on unfair practices by large dominant companies, which drive up prices. For the audio listeners, I'm staring directly into the camera. We're talking about removing the efficiencies defense, which is, if anyone listened to our episode with Commissioner Boswell, will be familiar with. Basically, the argument that if the reduction in competition creates efficiencies in the system, then it's like approvable. So they're looking to get rid of that in order to end anti-competitive mergers that raise prices and limit choices for Canadian consumers. And then generally empowering the Competition Bureau to block collaborations that stifle competition and consumer choice. Now, this is more in the grocer context. Like we're not a big grocery podcast. If we were, we would be talking about what's going on with Loblaws and the marking down prices of food that's about to go bad and stuff like that. But like this stuff still applies in the telecom context. So there are some things moving forward here. I'm wondering, beyond the relatively flat statement from Minister Champagne after someone in his office basically said, move to another country, I guess, and use their plans, because like maybe let's say this explicitly. In your expert opinion, in these plans that you're evaluating, if a customer wanted to switch service providers, would they be able to go somewhere and get a meaningfully different plan in terms of offering or price?
No, a lot of the carriers they match their prices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to make sure that we're like not bearing the lead of like there's nowhere else to go. Has there been since this time, because I think this was around January 8th in the last week or so, any further indication that I said on Minister Champagne are preparing to do anything to back up the comments from March 31st?
I have not seen anything to that effect, so no.
Have you generally felt overall responsiveness from that ministry in terms of like requests for questions or things like that? It's very understandable why the carriers might not want to be answering your questions about price increases, because their consumers are reading your publication every day. But from the government perspective, like, have you been able to get any time with any of these MPs or the minister to kind of like talk through what they might be considering, or is it a similar circumstance where requests or interests are not as well respected?
So to be honest, the only MP I did reach out to was MP Perkins.
Gotcha.
It was to clarify a comment he made, but and I believe it would be in his best interest to respond to that, because
okay,
it's essentially the wrong comment. But
Mr. Perkins, you are on the clock. Okay, well then maybe let's go back to this then. If there's been no word from ISED in terms of follow up.
Sorry, I do want to say that ISED, if they want to, they come out with their press releases. So for example, if you go back to the TTC issue that Rogers, Bell, and Telus had, they didn't have to intervene in that, but they did. So the ball is in their court
to drop something.
Exactly. It's not like they haven't, taken a step before in other situations.
Yeah. Okay. And again, this is something that the minister had basically promised. Now, the caveat there, again, this has all been qualified by that idea of, I think within a reasonable time frame, right? If I'm not seeing progression that I would like to be seeing, but that was about the lessening of prices, and we're seeing an increase. So in whatever time frame, we're going backwards, folks. Canada 2024, new year, new you. Let's talk about maybe that sense of urgency from this committee and being all up in arms, because there is obviously a conservative versus liberal alignment here when it comes to, I guess maybe where the energy and the enthusiasm is. And I know there was a Hill Times story, I think featuring Minister Lightbound being like, I actually don't think we get enough credit for how prices have decreased, which is really interesting. Do you get a sense that any of the energy from the conservative ministers is actually based upon a firm reaction to the insanity of the lack of competition when it comes to like the telecom space? Or do you get a sense of this as just have the ministers that have been speaking about this recently been speaking out about it for some time? Or is this just the most recent talking point to score points against the Liberals?
Right. So I do want to preface this by saying I am not a supporter of any party, so please do not come for me.
Yeah, same. Also, we're just talking we're just talking colors here. There's the reds and the blues on the telecom side and the political side as well, right?
Exactly. So I can't necessarily say that it was for political points, but I don't think that raising this question of prices going up was wrong. So in that discussion, in that meeting, that emergency meeting that the industry committee had, MP Turnbull, in that meeting, he was, I believe, referring to the 2023 November Consumer Price Index. At that time, that was the most recent price index. So I'm sure you guys have heard some news reports about inflation has increased.
Yeah.
So whenever we see those inflation has increased reports, that's where we go for the consumer price index reports. So it doesn't necessarily. I did not see anything about telecom specifically in the December one, but in the November one, he was referring to how telecom prices for new plans were decreased by 22.6% in November 2023 compared to November 2022. But I do think that there's one area of confusion here. The consumer price index only refers to new plans. So if
Mm.
I were to go and sign up for, a new Telus plan or whatever, that's what it's
So like
tracking.
a net new customer promotional plan
Exactly.
where they're like giving you get like you get Sportsnet and you get Hockey Night in
Exactly.
Canada. You get
It's
yeah,
not tracking the plans that Canadians already have.
gotcha.
And that's where the price hikes are coming in. They're on plans that Canadians already have. So while new plans might be going down, again, it comes back to the same thing that I said, go get another plan. Not everybody can go get another plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So again, it's not. I don't know if it's for political points or not. I think that when people point to the consumer index, they forget that it's on new plans, not on plans that Canadians already have.
yeah, and I would assume that this minister would have a way better grasp on this to have an understanding if they're paying close attention. Again, this might have just been another talking point. I really appreciate your point that like whether or not they're doing it for political points, it's still important to be raising these issues.
Mhm.
I guess the gap that then I would see there, if they don't actually care about it, it might be hard for them to enact or care about change because it is a lot to put on our competition commissioner, even with some new powers and some changes and a re-upped term to completely alter the state of industry and our economy in Canada. Like that's a pretty big file. I guess maybe where I'd want to take this then is because you've covered this for some time now. MobileSyrup has been doing this since the very very beginning. Where how you think maybe let me ask you this. How do you feel your readers are feeling right now about this stuff given the merger and the expectation? Because I would assume more than the average Canadian, they're more savvy, they're more proactively paying attention. They generally have a sense of like what's up. What has been the sentiment of this stuff as they've been tracking it? Has it just been like resigned, like of course this was going to
Mhm.
happen? Is there uproar matching what we're seeing from these MPs? Like what's the vibe check?
So I think Canadians have it's been a mix of uproar, but also just fatigue. Again, twice a year, people see these price increases.
Hmm.
Um, so there is uproar, yes, but there's also fatigue. So how often are they going to increase prices before, you know, Canadians say, okay, that's enough, or we don't want to do anything about this anymore.
Yeah, like
So
when do we just turn all of our phones off? And
exactly.
I think the maybe the one thing that we didn't talk about this is, and maybe this is a good little because the fatigue, I totally hear you. Even
Mhm.
even in doing this, we're like, this is aligned to not only BetaKit's beat when we're talking about innovation policy, what's happening there. We've obviously been big on competition as a solution to some of the issues that average Canadians face. But then back from like our OG status with connection with MobileSyrup and back when we were doing the CanCom podcast, very familiar with the telecom phone component of this and just
Mhm.
how annoying it is. Kind of getting tired of talking about this, but then you see these flash in the pan moments and you're hoping maybe something will actually catch fire and we'll see some movement. I'm not holding my breath for it, but I do have a lot more faith in the Competition Bureau to keep trying again, even if it costs them $13 million to try to fight some of this stuff. We'll see. But maybe to put a bow on this, this is coming at a time, to the I said comment, like just go somewhere else. We've already established that there is no price difference. Uh, Rogers just recently received, I think this week, a prestigious award for the first time in 15 years. Do you maybe want to walk us through what Rogers is now number one in?
So Rogers is number one in consumer complaints.
Okay.
So this goes to the CCTS annual report, and I believe they've been reporting for 15 years. And this is the first time Rogers has received the most complaints about this. Usually, I believe it's Bell that's at the top of the list, but Rogers has taken the cake. The time period does include I believe it started just a month after the outage.
Yeah, so they've caught a couple Rogers outages, and I guess there was even
Exactly.
a mini outage in the last
Yes.
recent period that I missed. I'm a Rogers customer, but I definitely remember um, the last major outage that
Yeah.
lasted full day, several days.
But the CCTS CEO did, I believe, say that this increase is not because of the outages.
Yeah, I think there's
Yeah.
just a general because I got the data here from your story. Rogers had received nearly 3,000 complaints, just under, which was a 44% increase year over year.
Yeah.
And then this is the first time the commission responsible for resolving complaints related to wireless, internet, TV, and home phone services received the most complaints about Rogers, surpassing the position that Bell has held for 15 years. And I don't know if it's more damning that Rogers has now surpassed Bell or that Bell was the worst for a decade and a half. But importantly to what we're talking about, because you could be upset at Rogers for cellular outages, internet outages, the state of the Blue Jays, what's going on with the Raptors, Sportsnet plans and packages, all that stuff. Specifically, issues in Rogers wireless business increased by 35% over the last year and account for 45% of all of the company's reported issues. So obviously, like, Canadians are starting to voice their stuff here. I guess we're still looking for a vehicle for that frustration. It's not like we can just maybe we should nationalize Rogers and take it over and then change things, or maybe we should actually get that fourth competitive telecom.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any pathways to what can be done here? Like, ideal world, like we make a Nida queen of telecom in Canada for long may you reign, as long as you want. What's the first thing that you're doing to change the situation? Is it the fourth carrier? Is it like a price cap? Is it a firing squad? Like, how would you rule?
I think I would pay more attention to MVNOs.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
This is where we're getting a little. Okay, talk to us about the MVNOs. What does that even mean? What are they?
So mobile virtual network operator is basically allowing smaller players to lease the networks of the incumbent players.
Yeah.
So Rogers, Bell, Telus, and I believe also SaskTel in Saskatchewan, to use basically their networks, their towers to deliver cell phone service.
Yeah.
So that would allow for more competition and more opportunity. And these smaller companies themselves are not responsible for building their own cell towers right away.
No, they're just basically leasing the space.
Exactly.
Very similar. If anyone uses like Tech Savvy for their internet, basically
exactly,
same thing, right?
So yeah, we have that on the internet side, but we do not have that on the mobile plan side. So I think that would be a great solution. I know that there are a lot of carriers who are working on it. A lot of companies are working on it because if
working on it.
So they say they're working on it. I think if that would come to fruition, that would be a lot better because there would just be so many more options.
Yeah.
And we've seen that if as one company increases prices, the other ones do too. I think with MVNOs, if they have the opportunity to keep a lower price, the national companies are not going to have any choice but to kind of follow through because they may not have.
The keeping of the lower prices is key. And this is where we get into CRTC stuff, because I know as a tech savvy customer, they're able to charge, like, they always have to go on top of the rate that Rogers charges them. And in most of these instances, they don't have access to solving any problems. Like, if I have an issue with my internet because it's being leased from Rogers in my neighborhood, Tech Savvy has to contact someone at Rogers, and then Rogers sends someone out. Yeah. Surprise, surprise, if you're a Tech Savvy customer, Rogers doesn't really prioritize that issue as they would other Rogers customers. And then particularly these carriers that are working on MVNO stuff, if they just set a default price that either prevents these companies from staying in business or charging the exact same thing, we're in the same position. It's worth noting that Tech Savvy has been looking for a buyer recently because their business is incredibly difficult. So in your rule, MVNOs with a bit of like price cap protection, I think that's super reasonable. Yeah. Anything else?
A firing squad.
Okay. I think that's maybe where we should leave it. not the most fun start to the year, but we are seeing some stuff, and we'll keep tracking of it. I will continue to be reading your articles about this stuff because that's how I stay informed. Nida, thank you so much for joining and walking us through this really depressing news.
Thank you for having me.